This is the Week in Sustainability from Sustain.Life. It's where our team of sustainability experts and practitioners share commentary to keep you up to date on developing stories and news.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Sontag. I'm a senior manager on our sustainability team here at Sustain.Life. Today, I'm joined by a new face, Danielle Aaron, who is a senior services designer on our design team. Danielle, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Nick.
I hope you're staying cool wherever you are because this summer is really one for breaking records. Extreme heat continues to rack really the entire planet, and last month was the hottest June on record, and the week before last was the hottest week ever recorded. Unfortunately, that heat is expected to continue for the near term. Europe is currently bracing for another week of record-setting temperatures, exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, with Spain, Italy, and Greece bearing the brunt. Meanwhile, here in the US, the South and West are continuing to set records as well. Phoenix, Arizona, for example, is going to hit its 20th day of temperatures above 110 degrees. Danielle, how have things been in your neck of the woods out in Colorado?
They've also been quite hot here. Denver has been consistently in the 90-degree Fahrenheit range, and between last week and this week and next week, I think we'll hit over 100 at least 2 days.
Wow.
Nick, you mentioned Arizona, and it made me think of the heat wave study that we talked about on the show a few weeks ago that looked at the health impacts of heat waves in Phoenix specifically. Are there any of those findings being borne out today?
Yeah, good call out. Last month, for those that aren't regular listeners, we talked about a paper that looked at the impacts of a 5-day heat wave in Phoenix that coincided with a power outage. So far, the power grid in Arizona has been okay, and they've been saying they've actually been producing a significant amount of excess power in the event they lose some generation. So hopefully, they're able to avert the most catastrophic conditions that that paper modeled. I did want to talk about, one other risk that can happen with a heat wave and power outages. Of course, we know that heat waves require a lot of energy because we're using a lot of AC. But there's also a risk with transmission lines because during a heat wave, when transmission lines they get hot, both from ambient heat as well as long hours of high transmission. When they get hot, they lengthen, and when they lengthen, they sag, and there's a risk that they can touch a tree or touch a building, in which case they would short circuit and that line would be out of operation. And though we have redundancies built into the grid, it still creates a strain on the grid to have to find other ways to get energy to houses and businesses. So thankfully or unthankfully, depending on how you look at it, the area around Phoenix is not heavily wooded, but this is something that grid operators have to keep an eye on during conditions like these. So, for example, a sunken transmission line was one of the many dominoes that caused the 2003 power outage that left 50 million people in the northeastern US without power.
Wow. Well, it's certainly a relief to hear that the grids have been okay in the Phoenix area so far, but it'll be something to watch out for in the future. So, Nick, I know we're hitting record temperatures, of course, more often because of climate change, but I've also been reading a lot about the impacts of this season's El Niño cycle, and I'm curious what you might know about the mechanisms of heat waves.
Okay. Well, you're really going to test my meteorological knowledge here. Um, what I know is that a heat wave starts with a high pressure system that kind of just sits over an area. And it's a high pressure system because it's just a lot of air that's pushing in on itself. And that air pushing in on itself forces a lot of air to sink to the ground. So then you have this layer of dense air close to the ground that becomes really hot. And another thing about high pressure systems is they tend to discourage the formation of clouds. So that means that there isn't cloud cover to block the sun. You have a lot of direct sun hitting the ground and just continually warming up all of this dense air. With a high pressure system, it's more likely to become a heat wave because with climate change overall, things are drier, there's more heat in the atmosphere. Water is really important because has a high thermal capacity. So when there's less water on the ground or in the plants on the ground, then there's less energy that it can absorb. So all of that energy just ends up staying in the air. So
Mm.
right now, I think extreme heat waves that used to happen like once a decade are now happening 3 times a decade. They're also on average 2 degrees hotter. And as we proceed sort of deeper into climate change, as things continue to get warmer, those types of heat waves are expected to occur 5 to 6 times a decade.
Wow.
So that's kind of the extent of what I know about heat waves, but I don't know much about El Nino. So what have you been reading?
Yeah, well, that was a great explanation. And similarly, as you know, El Nino is part of a natural climate phenomenon that's centered around the Pacific Ocean. So the cycle tends to present itself every 2 to 7 years on average, and then lasts between 9 to 12 months. So how does it work? Kind of similarly, while trade winds are normally blowing surface water in the Pacific from east to west, weekend winds during El Nino cycles end up allowing water to move eastward. So that's from Australia towards the Americas, growing increasingly warmer along the way. So again, this is a natural cycle for our planet, but as you know, similar to what you just said, as 90% of the heat that is trapped by greenhouse gases is actually absorbed by the cold water of the ocean. Warmer surface water means less heat absorption to counter the warming that's caused by our continuing emissions.
So we're at the start of an El Nino cycle now. What does that mean for what we can expect for the rest of the cycle, the heat waves that we're currently experiencing, et cetera?
Yeah, it's a great question. So with while extreme weather patterns like heat waves and increased rainfall are very common of El Nino cycles, we can expect to really see a compounding effect between El Nino and the extreme weather events caused already by climate change. So while 2023 is on track to break the heat records of 2016, which was the hottest year recorded, also during a powerful El Nino cycle, most of the heat in that cycle is released towards the end. So 2024 actually might end up breaking 2023's records as well.
Wow. So as with many things we discuss on this show, a lot of this sounds fairly daunting, but Danielle, I'm curious as a new joiner on the show, if you have ideas from what you've been reading for how we might mitigate the impacts of heat waves.
Absolutely. So the paper on heat waves in Arizona that you discussed a few weeks ago did find that planting more urban trees had a significant impact on reducing indoor temperatures. So while trees not only block sunlight from indoor spaces, they also contain moisture that can absorb the heat. So definitely a good recommendation for, city planners, policymakers, et cetera.
Yeah, such a good takeaway. I'm always down for more trees. And to tack on, I think I would say, there's this synergy almost between heat waves and solar power generation because during heat waves there tends to be a lot of sunlight, and right now for a place like Arizona, all that extra generation that they're producing to meet their demand is coming from fossil fuels. So there's a huge opportunity for solar to step in here since sunshine is so ample during a heat wave. If we can expand the use of solar and use energy storage along with that, we can take advantage of the coincidence of heat waves and solar power to power all of that cooling that we need. So right now in a place like Arizona, only about 15% of their power comes from solar. So there's a ton of room to grow and a lot of opportunity.
Absolutely.
And that wraps up today's The Week in Sustainability. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Sustain.Life is a sustainability management SaaS platform with deep carbon expertise that helps future-proof small and medium-sized enterprises by taking climate action. Go to Sustain.Life to learn more. Thanks for listening and watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you next week.